Go ahead.
I wasn't really sure how I was going to approach this presentation, so I thought the easiest way to go would just be to take a plant family and run with it. So I chose Ericaceous plants because, first of all, they're very beautiful. They're kind of interesting because, as you can see from the text that I extracted here from, I think, Roland's, it's mostly made up of shrubs and small trees. There's over 4,000 species worldwide, spread over 124 genera. It was the 14th most species-rich family of flowering plants, which I thought was very interesting. And of course, it has some very important commercial members. It has a huge distribution. The leaves are generally evergreen, simple, opposite, alternate, or whorls. So it depends on the genus and the species. Toothed or entire without stipules, that means like appendage from its base leaf stalks. Whoops. And the flowers, of course, can sometimes be solitary, more often borne in clusters, usually 5 petals, 5 sepals, 10 stamens, and the petals are more often fused. The fruits can be either berries, capsules, drupes, and that depends on the species. So I thought I'd start with a mat forming plant, and many of these do form very large colonies of mats, black crowberry and petrum nigrum. The flowers are exceptionally small, and it took me years to actually find a plant in bloom because they flower very, very early on. Do I have a cursor? So the photo at the top shows the almost insignificant flowers. They're very dark reddish brown. And and they're in the leaf axil. So if you look here, for instance, all these little reddish spots are actually the flowers. And that was something that was new to me because for years I've been looking for flowers and never finding them. Thinking, gee, that's so weird. I'm finding them because it's an evergreen plant. You find it all the time. Couldn't find the flowers until I did some research, and that's what it was. So I decided that it would be fun to kind of indicate where I find these plants. So this one with the flowers I found in May. So they flower very, very early in the spring at the Jersey Cove sandbar. So of course that's on very sandy soil with a rocky substrate. And then this mat I found out on Shetty Camp Island on our field trip this summer in July. And I found berries already at Micah Hill, which is high elevation, very broad, open wetland. What is it called up there, Bob? What is Micah Hill? How would you characterize it?
Well, barrens, like a high altitude.
Barrens, thank you. Yeah, the word escaped me. Thank you. So yeah, at Micah Hill, I finally found some with berries. So the fruits start to form very, very early in the season. And then black huckleberry, the Gaylosakia baccata. What I found interesting about these two plants, the two huckleberries that we commonly find here in Cape Breton, the black huckleberry on the left, with these stunning scarlet flowers, often form solitary plants. And this was out in Gabriel's Bog. And the huckleberry was spread out over an extraordinarily large area, but on raised hummocks. So where the huckleberry was found, it was relatively dry, but surrounded by bog. And as you can see, it was in bloom. And then on the lower left is the black huckleberry with fruit. And that was in July. So it seems to have a relatively short season. Northern dwarf huckleberry, the Gaylosakia bigeloviana. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I found that on the exact same day, on June 11th, but that should be 2017, and this to 7. The photo on the extreme left. And as you can see, we have the typical fused petals of this genus. And they're just very beautiful, very waxy white, abundant. And it formed very large colonies. Again, just another plant in bloom. And I chose the center just so that you can see that the evergreen leaves, which are oval, not too acutely tipped, but very shiny green on the upper surface, and then brown and rather powdery on the base. And then down in the lower left, just a close-up of the beautiful urn-shaped flowers. Trailing arbutus, Epigea repens, variously called Mayflower, all kinds of things. I prefer Epigea, it's just easier. It is one of those beautiful little ground huggers, and it's definitely classified as a sub-shrub, so it's less than 10 centimeters in height. And again, this plant, which is found often, even in the middle of a forest, there's a suitable niche that is open as long as it's rather wet. But usually I find it in association with the coniferous and the forest edges. It flowers in a variety of shades, as you can see, white, pink. I found buds that were cream colored. Big Brook Cutoff is the top left photo. That's just a trail I like to follow down the road from where I live. April 25th, although I do have flowers in bloom from much earlier than that. And I've often found Epigea flowering when we still have snow on the ground. And I really like it, so I put in a lot of pictures. And here's some more. You can see the bright pink and then the pale pink. And I love those kind of creamy, almost yellowish buds. And 2022 was really, I found, a spectacular year for Epigea repens. I see it every year, and sometimes I see it earlier than others. But for whatever reason, last year, it's just a profusion of Epigea no matter where I went. Wintergreen, aka Eastern Tea-berried Altheria procumbens, is not as common here as I think it is in other places in the province, but we do find it in a variety of locations. It's generally on very dry, very poor soils, often associated with mosses. The top left is a photo taken at Bourne Lake, and these plants flower much later than, say, Epigea, and they don't start flowering really until mid-July here in Cape Breton. And then on the Jack Pine Trail down below, the lower photo again in bloom, and once again you can see they have the flowers, diffused petals, and the petal tips are slightly recurved, which is kind of neat. And then on the top right, you see a plant with fruit already formed by late August. And once again, you can see very clearly the entire leaf, untoothed, very smooth margins, heavily veined, leathery, very, very rough and tough leaves, very shiny on the upper surface. Mountain cranberry, I found it's also called lingonberry, and Rosalind had this in her garden, vaccinated by this idea. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it. You know, we see these names in books and we never get an opportunity to talk about them with anybody else, so whether or not I'm pronouncing it correctly, please forgive me if I'm not. This is a creeper, of course, and it will form enormous populations given the proper growing conditions. The one I found over at Middle Head in July, July the 12th of 2022, that's the top left photo. You can see it produced pink blooms, and more often than not, I have found this flowers in white as in the center photo. And these also flower quite late, from early July. You can find blooms. And then by the end of July, it had already formed fruit at Jack Pine Trail. Jack Pine Trail is in the Cape Breton Highlands, and I don't know, perhaps somebody can answer this for me, whether or not elevation hurries along the season. But I did find from research that it does generally start producing its fruit by late July. The more common American cranberry, that's in macrocarpon. Oh, these are all, I chose photos all from this year. Normally I try and get them from a variety of years, but the top left photo was taken on a field trip in the summer. And you can see the magnificent pink flowers with the very, very deeply recurved petals. And they're really quite stunning. And the top right is just showing the mat that these plants form and the abundance of the flowers, which of course is going to result in an abundance of fruit, as in the lower center photo. And these actually they flower later, from mid to late July into early August. And then the fruit is starting to form by mid to late September. You can see that the leaves here, they're very, very abundant. They're much smaller than some of the other Ericaceous plants. They tend to be very profuse on the stems as well. And once again, we get a very simple leaf, very shiny above and not so shiny below. Blueberries, of course, they come in a variety of varieties. The velvet leaf blueberry, this was a real nice find for me down at Big Harbor because this is a very uncommon species here in Cape Breton. You can see if you look closely, I tried to get as close as I could without it fading out. You can actually see the down on the leaves, and especially at the leaf margin. Once again, a very typical blueberry flower with fused petals and really curved tips. Also, they, like many other plants in the Ericaceae family, the buds will be much, much darker than the mature flowers. And the abundance, of course, of flowering indicates an abundance of fruit. The low bush blueberry, which is the one with which we are most familiar, and the one that goes on the roadsides and on field margins and just virtually everywhere, just forest edges. This is the one that we pick. This is the one that we know is our favorite fruit for August. Again, we have a typical plant. These are also a sub-shrub. They rarely get about 10 centimeters. The leaves are acutely tipped. They start out very green and then they get red in maturity. And once again, the very typical beautiful little balls that rim-shaped flowers, resulting once again in a profusion of berries, which of course are pink at the beginning and mature that dark blue. And that's when they know they're ready for us. Bog blueberry, Bethsheila uliginosum. This was my first encounter on our field trip this summer with this particular blueberry. You'll notice the difference in the shapes of all of the leaves of these three species of Bethsheila. As I say, the velvet leaf, just like the name says, the leaves are down. And then the low bush blueberry, the angustifolia, the leaves are much narrower. And then with the uliginosum, they are very rounded. And the fruit is very similar to the angustifolium. And of course, we helped ourselves when we were up at Michael Hill, and they're very sweet, really quite lovely the fruit. Oh, what was I going to say? No, it's not going to be. I was just going to comment on the twigs, that they're very shiny as a rule in all tree species. And then we get into the calamias, the laurels. The first one I'm showing you here is the swamp bog with tail laurel. It's known by all three, the Calamia colifolia. All of the the photo on the left is a plant in bloom. And again, this is a late bloom. These are summer bloomers. Very late June in a good season, more often early July into mid-July. And that was taken on the Bog Trail. And those of you who have investigated the Bog Trail know just how incredible it is in terms of its flowering plants. And then when we got over to Micah Hill, that was taken July the 4th on another field trip, not the summer trip. But I did get the beautiful capsules that these flowers produce that hold their seeds at Micah Hill on July 29th of this year. I think that architecturally they're really stunning. And also on the photo on the left, you can see just how linear these leaves are. Very shiny on the top, evergreen, and on the bottom, they're actually quite grayish. And then sheep laurel, which of course we all know, anathema, I believe, to those who have horses on their properties. Calamia angustifolia, it's very, very common, but extraordinarily beautiful. Both of these photos were taken at the same location on the 2nd of July last year, just before our field trip. And these are actually growing on a rocky ledge right by the edge of the Cape Trail, just up from where I live. But I very often see them in wooded areas, and again, as I say, very common. These plants, the Calamia angustifolia, they really like a dry soil. They thrive in dry soil. in my experience. Anyway. And then we jump completely to a different plant altogether, Bethsheila or Princess Pine, and Family umbellata. This is another one of those quite spectacular Ericaceous plants that, given the right conditions, will form enormous mats of these beautiful evergreen world leaves. You can see on the top left photo, I took that in part of the Cape Breton County's watershed area at Johnson Lake in December. And you can see it had already formed flower in the center of the whorl. And then on the bottom left, these start flowering quite early, as opposed to many other members of this family. Flowers start to show as early as mid-May. And then in the center, I have, okay, so down below in bloom on May 16th, the center is a later photo, also taken at Big Harbor, actually in the same plantation where I found the one in bloom on the lower left. And you can see that already the flowers are starting to fade and the seed capsules are starting to form. And there's a better shot of the capsules on the lower right. And just another close-up of these quite remarkable, very unusual flowers. One of the things that I like about the Bethsheila is that the flowers are generally nodding, although you would not know that from the picture on the lower left because I'm actually lying on the ground when I took that photo so I could get a good shot of it from underneath. But if you look at the other photos of the plants, then you can see that they are nodding. Labrador tea, rhododendron goylandicum, very, very common evergreen, and this is a shrub in the Ericaceous plant group. Very common, found on disturbed soils, on forest floor. It's just super common, and usually in a mixed conifer hardwood forest environment, you'll find it more closely associated with the conifers. The leaves, of course, are enrolled. The tops of the leaves are green, not necessarily shiny. Sometimes a very dull surface. But the undersides, as you can see from the photo on the lower right, have a distinctly brownish tinge, and they are quite dusty. And then, of course, just close-ups of the flowers. The one on the lower left is poking its head up out of the boardwalk at the dog trail up in the Highlands, at the top of the French Mountain. And on the top right, I included that photo simply because there were these black beetles in pollinating, I guess. And I tried to find out what the beetle was, and I was hoping that Dave McCorkadale would be doing his presentation because he is an entomologist, and I was going to ask him if he could kindly identify the beetle because I couldn't nail what it was. And this is my last group of photos, Rhododendron canadensis, which forms incredible populations. This is a true shrub, usually less than a meter in height, a prolific bloomer, as you can see. On the top left, this is at Paquette Lake. And those of you who were on the field trip this past summer to Cape Breton, Paquette Lake is the access to Mica Hill. And of course, we were there a little late to enjoy the rhododendron because, of course, it is one of the earliest bloomers in the Ericaceous group. I was introduced to this by one of the park biologists back in the early part of this century. The photo on the upper left taken in 2006 is very typical of what you'll find at Paquette Lake. The hillside there is simply littered with rhododendron in early June. And then over, of all places, on disturbed ground in an industrial area in 2022, I found the other two photos and just took a couple of close-ups. And I think that might be it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Want to turn off the sharing there and then we'll look at everybody.
Are there any questions? Just a lot of pretty pictures.
It makes me realize just how many Ericaceous plants there are in this province when you start to think about it, eh?
Well, there's quite an interesting list in my Bolins, which is my new Bibles. And Todd Boland's trees and shrubs of the Maritimes, he has quite an inventory of ericaceous plants, of which I only have, oh, not even half. So this has, of course, got me inspired to be out there next year, searching out ericaceous plants in every nook and cranny of Cape Breton.
I remember reading about, I've been sort of trying to find out more and more about the relationship of fungi with certain plants and that, and there's a whole group of fungi for the ericaceous plants that has its own little way. It's sort of a spiral, it grows into the root and has sort of a spiral characteristic to it that's very unique to the ericaceous plants, and it's its own thing just for ericaceous plants. So it's
no surprise. They're quite unusual because of the fused petals, and most of them are so small. And I love the fact that they're not forming, and you can just take over whole areas when given the proper opportunity. And many of them, they grow at elevation, so you get them in these quite remarkable little vignettes with reindeer lichens and other such interesting phenomena. Anyway.